What's happening, friends? It's another episode of Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent Axe, and boy, we got all the channels on today. We're on the Syracuse Orange basketball Facebook page, football, lacrosse. We turned you on. Are you ready for some lacrosse as the Orange start their season against Vermont at the Dome on Saturday? We are live on Twitter and YouTube as well. So that's what we do. Thursdays, about noon Eastern time. We flip on the channels. We talk live. Your comments, your questions, welcome throughout the show. We'll highlight those as they come in. Anything on the table when it comes to Syracuse sports, and there's a lot to discuss there. So come on by, join the party live. If you can't be here live, certainly the replay, easy to find on these channels you're watching now. It archives there. We put up a post on syracuse.com, and certainly I'll fire out the videos on social media as well. So a few things on the agenda today. We're certainly going to talk some Syracuse basketball, the reaction to my column about Jim Boeheim, which, boy, I have been just overwhelmed by the responses to that. So thank you for that one way or the other. Agree or disagree. I appreciate everybody that's reached out on that. What's ahead for the Orange in terms of the month of February here, as the NCAA tournament is now, frankly, a pipe dream for Syracuse, short of winning the ACC tournament. So we'll look ahead there. We've got a football schedule to get into, an interesting schedule. I don't agree with Syracuse's decision to move the Pittsburgh game to Yankee Stadium, as we will get into that. And as noted a second ago, hey, Lacrosse has entered the chat. Where have you come from? But I'm excited because I'm just a big lacrosse fan, love the sport. I'm actually going to be covering lacrosse a little bit more for syracuse.com this year, so stay tuned to that. And we got a lot on the agenda. So what do you say we jump right in the pool? Let's start with basketball. And let me just start with really a message about the column that I wrote, the tweet that I sent out about Jim Boeheim and his post-game press conference antics and that whole thing that's been going on. So for those of you that maybe have kind of heard about it, seen it a little bit, let's just recap quickly. So after the Virginia game, remember, Benny Williams isn't at the Dome. He's not even there. No reason was given as to why Benny Williams was not there. Usually when these things happen, you get some sort of indication. It's an academic issue. It's an illness, right? There's some sort of vague reason given, and then Jim will talk about it at his post-game press conference. Nothing was given about it. All we were told was Jim would address it at his post-game press conference. So Syracuse loses. The post-game press conference comes. Jim does his opening statement. He doesn't mention it. So the first question out of the gate comes from Sam Corcoran, a Citrus TV reporter, and all he says is, Jim, what's the status on Benny Williams? And Jim, very snarky and very, in his Jim Boeheim way, says, is that your most important question? Is that your first question? The reporter says, yes, he wasn't on the court today. And then not only does Jim repeat, is that your most important question, he looks at Sam and says, and you've got a bad attitude, right? So, yeah, another Jim Boeheim exchange at a press conference. I tweeted about it and said, look, who's got the bad attitude here, right? You have a reporter asking a valid question, a situation we were not aware of that we were told you would address, the order of which doesn't matter. And look, see, when you go in a situation like this, we just watched the game. I know what happened in the game. It's the unknowns that go to the top of the list. And by the way, the order of the question shouldn't matter one way or the other. But if Jim didn't think he was going to be asked about that and asked about that early, I don't know what to tell you, especially when you have a player that started 20 games for you and he just didn't show up for a game. That's kind of a big deal, right? So I tweeted about it. I wrote a column about it as well. I mean, I think I've just been struck by the amount of people that are tired of the press conference behavior, that saw this as kind of the latest in an incident of just, look, Jim Boeheim has certainly gone off at press conferences in the past. Usually it's, against some sort of thing that was written about him or said about the team, and people have cheered it on in the past, right? Yeah, take that, Doug Gottlieb, or take that, national media doubting Syracuse being in the tournament. And, as fans, especially when the team's doing better, you kind of cheer that thing on, none more famous than, the 10 bleeping game speech that Jim gave after in the 2006 Big East tournament, right? But I think what really struck me was a number of people that reached out on a number of forums, Twitter, email, text, whatever the case may be, just to say, like, man, I'm sick of this. There's no reason for it. Why does this guy continually, represent the university in this way? And remember, about a week ago, another student reporter asked a question about, why can't Syracuse close games? And he cited stats and he said, look, I think it was like 2 of the last 3 games you had lost games by less than 4 points. Why can't your team close games? And that was actually about 4 or 5 minutes into the press conference. And Jim just walked out, right? So look, frustration spilling over. This is a team that's not heading for the NCAA tournament, short of the ACC tournament win, right? And Jim's been like this before, but I think people are sick of it. I think people are saying, why you continually just make things personal, pick on if it's student reporters, other reporters, and you forget the media, right? Forget about, we're used to it. We're used to the back and forth. That's just how Jim is. He represents Syracuse University. He represents Syracuse fans. He's the most front-facing employee at Syracuse University. And time after time, this is what you get. So that whole exchange with the reporter, that's on SportsCenter. They ran that whole thing. Second time in less than a week, you got Scott Van Pelt on a highly rated ESPN SportsCenter, basically mocking Syracuse. And this is what we're talking about. It might be by design in a way to avoid talking about the team, maybe heading for another losing season, heading for a season that's not going to finish. And forget the NCAA tournament. They're not even locked into the NIT right now. We'll see what February brings and if they can play their way into some sort of postseason appearance. But it's just a lot of things coming to a head. And look, there's a lot of people that want to see a change made, that would rather see Jim, retire and move on. And let's see what the future of Syracuse basketball looks like. So maybe that enters the conversation. There's a lot of things in the cocktail. There's a lot of recipes coming together, a lot of ingredients in the recipe, I should say, coming together at once. But I've just been struck by the people that have reached out to me that were, fervent supporters of Jim. Forget the people that want to see him fired and are critical of Syracuse basketball, and they're just, pouncing on the red meat. It's the people that I've heard from, and I'm talking about a lot of messages, not just a few, that say something along the lines of, man, I've always supported this guy, but I can't do it anymore. Like, what is it? Why is he doing this? And it's just, there's something about what's happened here that, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, right? And it's easier to support these things and brush them aside and let them go when the team's winning. I'm not saying that's right. It's just kind of the nature of the beast and the sports fan. So that's been crazy for sure. And we'll see what happens going forward here. They got a couple of games on the road, and then, there's the quad one opportunities are few and far between. They lost another close game to Virginia. They played their best game of the year. Getting to the basketball side of it against Virginia, but they just can't close these games. Certain things happen. Joe Girard struggled. Jesse Edwards was better. Judah Mintz continues to play at a really high level, and that encouragement. But I think people realize, each team is always a different story within the season, but particularly with the transfer portal and players going to the pros and just how easy it is to have a completely different team year to year. You kind of have to get the best out of each team before it completely restructures itself in this day and age we're in. And I think a lot of fans are looking at it from a lot of different angles here. As Ben says, Boeheim's always been polarizing, but much easier to tolerate when the team is winning and a lock for the tournament. Paul notes there's been sad precedents for some coaches who stayed beyond their welcome. Woody Hayes, Joe Paterno, Bobby Knight, Bobby Bowden did manage to exit gracefully. I've been fearing for a few years that Boeheim will do or say something that will embarrass the university to the point that his name will be wiped off the floor in similar fashion to those cases. Let's not hope that's the case, but just things like that pile up are embarrassing. What is Ken Severud thinking? What is John Wildhack thinking? Put anybody on that list that's either above Boeheim or just is, somewhat of a representative of Syracuse, even if you're just a fan. And this is what he does time after time. And it was just not called for at all, and that's a student you're talking to, right? At the end of the day, you are an educator. At the end of the day, you're a coach, and you're treating a Syracuse University student just in an uncalled for way. All the reporter said was, what's his status? And that turns into, you have a bad attitude, and just this whole intimidating thing that Boeheim does. It's just not okay. And it can't continue that way. Jim is certainly free, and that's it. Look, that's his show. That's his forum. If he disagrees with the way his team's being represented, the things I wrote about him, said about him, whatever it is, of course, he has every right to say that and fire back. I'm not saying he can't question things and express his opinion, but I'm just saying, like, the way he does it is just not carrying weight anymore with people. People are kind of getting tired of it. So we'll see it, because this team's got a month to go. And if they keep losing, the frustration's going to pile up. And who knows? They could be heading for their second losing season in a row here. But look, they've got a month ahead of them where they've got to try and navigate that through the best they can. Let's pull up the rest of the way here for this team, because the quad one opportunities, they're 0-5 in those games this year. They've got a few either quad one or quad two games left, but I think as we sit here on Groundhog Day, you hope it's not a repeat of last year on Groundhog Day, if you will, right? But you go to Boston College Saturday, at Florida State on Wednesday. Look, these are two teams Syracuse can and should beat. Both of those teams have given great teams a little bit of a challenge here and there. It's the ACC, all these cliches I'm supposed to, kind of put into these conversations. You're starting to see teams the second time around. Syracuse beat Boston College on New Year's Eve, 79-65. In that instance, Florida State has just not been up to their usual level with Leonard Hamilton and what we see of them, but it's on the road, and you just can't take these things for granted. After that, you got a few either quad one or quad two opportunities all in a row. Syracuse will play NC State at home on Valentine's Day. The big Duke game coming up on February 18th. That's on a Saturday. And then Wednesday, the 22nd at Clemson. It's Clemson and Virginia right now in a tight race to see who's the best team in the league. At Pitt, Syracuse had that monster comeback against Pitt back in December, but ultimately lost that game by 2, one of those close games they couldn't close out in that sense. And then you finish with Georgia Tech and Wake Forest at home. So look, there's just no room for error here if this team is going to have a prayer to be in any sort of postseason conversation. And I'm talking about the 3-letter one, not the 4-letter one. The 4-letter one is out of the equation unless they win the ACC tournament. They just don't have the numbers. They just don't have the net ranking at this point. Bob says even when they were winning back in the day, he was like that. Feel bad for Coach Mack and Coach Autry. Scott says nobody in Central New York knows the game better than Boeheim. He eats, sleeps, and whatever basketball. I mean, nobody's doubting his basketball knowledge and what he's accomplished at this point. It's just some of the other things beyond that we're talking about. No, they are not a quad one, Paul. Boston College is way down the list in the net ranking. So that's just kind of a take care of business kind of win. It doesn't help Syracuse's resume in the least, but I believe they're actually quad 3 at this point. I'd have to double check, but they're way down the list, and it doesn't help Syracuse's resume one way or the other at this point. Chris thinks that Boeheim should take a personal day, right? Just as Benny Williams did. And how odd was that? And look, if he had to take a personal day, I don't begrudge you that. We're in a new era. Sometimes people just need to get away from things. He lost his starting job on Saturday. There's been some friction all year there, of course. Benny's gotten the quick hook a lot. He's been inconsistent. Boeheim's railed on him, rightfully so, from a basketball standpoint, and his inability to rebound and some of the things he just has not been able to contribute to this team. But I've never heard of that. I've never heard of a player taking a personal day on game day. That's a first for me. Players have missed games for injuries, for academic reasons, for weird things that have come up through the years, right? But I just need a day on game day in a big game, by the way, one of the bigger games you can play. That's not good. That's not good. So I hope Benny's okay. Hope everything's going all right and they square it away. I've been saying in a lot of places that I still think there's a role for Benny on this team. It's no longer as a starter, as Malik Brown's just more consistent. He's physical in the paint. He's great around, getting better around the hoop, does the rebounding that Jim Boeheim's looking for. And it's just somebody that brings you energy at this point. So we'll see how that goes. But as far as I know, Benny's been back at practice, and, we'll see what this team does going down the stretch here at this point. Scott thinks I should get over it. Hurt feelings. I think Jim Boeheim's a 78-year-old professional, and if somebody asks him a question in a professional setting and there's no ill intent behind it, he should just answer it, right? And be a professional instead of being, I'm not going to start naming names here and getting into name calling here, but when you got a situation where the 19-year-old college kid is the professional and the 78-year-old is the whiny baby, I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good. If you think I got to get over it, that's your opinion, and I respect that. But like I said, I have been completely overwhelmed by people that feel the same way. Not that I'm more right than you or they're more right than you or whatever the case may be. But I don't think this is the case of just get over it. I think this is the case of, a 78-year-old professional should pick his spots when he fights with particularly student reporters, as opposed to just, oh, that's just Jim. I mean, that doesn't make it right. That's just how he is. No, that doesn't make it right. And maybe it took too long for people to really stand up and say, you just can't do that. That's fair. That if I'm late to the party on that, but if you think I should get over it, that's your right. Rob says, hey, when Jim talks basketball, good games are bad, he's still on top of his game. But when he comes out and acts like he did the other night for the opening question, it's only natural. We're going to question his ability to rationalize certain situations, especially given his age. And look, I'll give you this. The edge is still there. The competitiveness is still there. But this whole thing like, it's, press conferences, it's 10 minutes after a game, he's still upset. I mean, he's done this hundreds of times, right? I appreciate that he's honest, and I will always give Jim Boeheim credit this. He still has an open locker room, which is a rare thing these days, and it gives complete access to his players. Usually players are kind of, trudged into the press room, and, it's everybody's kind of asking the same questions. So I'll give Jim credit for that. He's very accessible beyond press conferences. He's a very opinionated guy, but so am I. And I mean, the opinion I hold on this is the opinion I hold on this. So we'll see where it goes from here. James says, so what's the story with Benny? It's interesting because I remember a lot of people were thinking, go back to last season when he's a freshman and he's a highly touted freshman. Remember, he came in as a 4-star guy and he wasn't getting in, and there was really a call. There's always that player or two that fans want to see more of. It's just kind of a natural thing that happens year to year. And I remember Mike Curtis, my old colleague here at syracuse.com, wrote a great piece about Benny and what he was thinking and what he was feeling. And remember, Benny didn't really get into the rotation until the last 7-8 games of the season last year. But in that piece, and I don't want to misquote him here, but Benny said in that story, basically no, I'm going to ride it out. I trust the coaches. I trust the plan they have for me, because there was a lot of fears, given the world we live in today, that he could go into the transfer portal at this point, right? How does he feel about that now? Now that he's been taken out of the starting lineup, had to take a personal day. Certainly there's been some friction, as you noted there. I mean, Benny could play somewhere. I think Benny has an opportunity to play somewhere. I'm not saying it's over here. It seems to be a lot of writing on the wall that he could enter the portal if they can't work this out. And Jim just doesn't feel like he's doing what he needs to do, which, by the way, is an absolutely fair assessment. I mean, you need that guy to rebound. I love that Benny can score, and he's somewhat of another 3-point threat. And I just like the athleticism. And we've just seen those moments from Benny this year. But if you play forward, you got to rebound. You can't continually look at that box score after the game and see 1 or 2 rebounds combined from Chris Bell and Benny Williams. And Bell has been better on the offensive end. You still look at the rebounding numbers and you wish they would up there, but Bell got pulled after, 14 seconds in the game earlier this week against Virginia. Comes back in the second half, actually gave that team a little bit of a lift, gave him a couple of 3-pointers. So Bell's trying to hang in there too. But man, when you're in Boeheim's doghouse, you're on that short hook, it's tough to get out of that. So that forward position overall has been a fascinating one to see develop, and that's why we've seen Malik Brown get into the lineup. Mahir wants to know, how do you feel about Jim walking out of a presser? I don't agree with it, but wanted to know your thoughts. I think there's better ways to handle that, right? I mean, it's his right. If he doesn't want to answer the question, fine. I thought it was a fair question. There was a little opinion in there, but I thought it was fair to ask because that's happened. Pitt, Miami, North Carolina, now Virginia, they have won a couple of close games. Don't get me wrong. Notre Dame notably a couple of times, but those games aren't as important in terms of what ultimately this team's playing for. What Jim has said matters the most, the tournament, right? So the close games that they haven't closed out in quad one, they haven't done it. So why not? What is it? Is it a freshman making some mistakes? Is it, the wrong player has the ball in the wrong spot? I mean, I love Judah Mintz, but he's made some mistakes down the stretch, taking some shots he shouldn't. And, that's been well documented at this point. And boy, here we are this far down the road in the show. And I do have a couple more things I want to get to, but you guys have been asking some good questions about basketball. Judah Mintz has 41 points in the last 2 games. 41 points. Too bad they're both in losses. But the comfort and the confidence he has in the paint, challenging Virginia defenders, Judah's got to make a decision. Either he runs the offense or he is the offense, and he's an offensive-minded point guard to start. And it was less than 2, if you really think about it, going to the Virginia game saying he shouldn't have done that. Like bad shots, bad decisions in terms of, do I pass it or shoot it? He played great in that realm. So there is talent there. And that's the thing with these close games. They're not getting their doors blown off by even the best teams in the league. So it's like so close yet so far away, right? Hall & Oates and that great song about being right there, but they just can't get over the hump. And to be fair, like some of these teams they're playing in those spots are some of the more experienced teams not only in the league, but in the country, right? Miami, Carolina, Notre Dame, they're not good in the sense of quad rankings and everything, but that's an experienced team that you played. Virginia, obviously, an experienced team. All those names that we've heard the past couple of years, like Clark and Beekman and these guys that are still there. But I feel like hopefully all this experience that these young guys have gained, notably guys like Judah and Malik and the younger guys in there, it's got to pay off at some point. I'm not talking about next year. I'm talking about this year. So inevitably there's going to be a few more close games here in February against some of those better teams. And can they get over the hump and gain the confidence that comes from something like that? Back to a couple of things you guys said here. Lee, I just don't think Benny's built to be a power forward in the ACC. Haven't seen much of him at small forward. Still needs to rebound. Paul says, concerning the succession plan, that's Brent, Brent, not Brett. It happens every day. Don't worry. Who do you think's next in line? Autry and Griffin are clearly the front runners due to recruiting success and coaching experience. I think Griffin is the edge in coaching, while Autry may be the better recruiter. If I had to guess, Paul, if they go that route and stay in-house, that it would be Autry, actually. Autry's got some experience recruiting. Jerry's in the mix for sure. I don't think Alan Griffin's quite ready to be a head coach quite yet. All 3 of them are great in their own realm. My hope is that they don't just do that. If you look outside the family, if you will, and you feel like it's better to stay in it, I understand that because they know what Syracuse is and how to recruit for Syracuse and what it means. You know, Duke did it with John Shire. Carolina did it with Hubert Davis. There's other examples of that. I understand that. But I think John Wildhack has to recognize, like, this is Syracuse University basketball. It's a big-time brand. You're in the ACC. You have one of the best practice facilities in the country. The Carrier, I said it, the JMA Wireless Dome, old habits die hard, is one of the great environments in the sport when it's really rocking. Like, you got some things here that could draw on a coach. Would you pay a coach, right? I'll say this about Boeheim. He's been a bargain, right? Jim Boeheim's like the 35th highest paid coach in college basketball. He makes up for it, don't get me wrong, and sponsorship opportunities, other revenue, but based on what Syracuse pays him, I mean, he's dirt cheap. He's dirt cheap compared to some of these other coaches out there. So if Syracuse went outside the family, they'd have to up the ante in that department. So long story short, if they did that, I actually think it would be Autry. That'd be my best guess at this point. Rob says Jim walking out of a presser is far more tolerable than scapegoating a 19-year-old student. True, in the sense of it. Brandon says, I thought it was a fair question. I did not like that Jim thought he was over answering that. Any other coach would have to answer it, and we would not have positive seasons here the last few years. He should have answered the question. And yeah, especially if he is the one that's the source on this. You know, if they put out a press release before the game, even something as simple as, you know, Benny Williams missed the game due to personal reasons, right? And if he doesn't want to go any further than that, that's fine. That's his right. But they didn't even do that. They just said, nah, he's not here, Jim. We'll talk about it after the game. So, I mean, what did you think we were going to ask about? Like, the unknown is what gets to the top of the list. I just watched the game. I know why you lost. You didn't make your free throws because free throws matter. And all those things, they'll all get asked and covered in a sense, but who cares if it was the first question, right? Like, that's what I just can't get over that. So a couple more hoops comments from you guys. I do want to get some football and lacrosse in before we wrap up here in a few minutes, but you guys are bringing some good stuff here. Rob says it wouldn't shock me if Hopkins came back to take over. A lot of people have said that. Unfortunately, Mike might be on the hot seat out there at Washington. I know he loves it out there, but that could time out, that if he's available and if Jim retires, that they just make that move. I think that'd be a very popular move to bring Hopkins back here. Pac-12 basketball, a little different than the ACC. Hopkins' recruiting prowess is well known, and I think the approval rating on that would be very high. Mary Ellen says there are coaches, even if they're not getting the job done, why keep any of them? I think they should clean house. Lee says, looking back on Hopkins leaving, speaking of which, might have been a blessing in disguise considering his struggles at Washington. Could be. I think sometimes you got to learn how to be a head coach before you can be a head coach, if that makes any sense, right? Pac-12's, that's a tough gig out there. I thought Hop would be, look, he was the Pac-12 coach of the year a couple of times. He had a couple of good years, but the longer they don't make the tournament and kind of, straddle the 500 line, which they are right now, and just not making the impact, he's actually brought some good recruits out there. And, I think all told, it's been a disappointment. I love Mike Hopkins as a person and, would love to cover him as a coach. And just, man, he's just one of those guys. Every time you talk to him, you get a surge of energy. I don't think that would affect Hopkins coming back here in that scenario. I think people would love it. I think they would love it. You look at it with somewhat of a skeptical eye, but I think people would love it. Okay. Before we go, a couple more things I wanted to throw at you guys here. So you guys can keep talking hoops in the comments and I'll highlight them as we go here. But I did want to mention a couple of other things, including football. The Syracuse football schedule comes out. And here's what we're looking at for 2023. So Syracuse will open with 2 straight games at the Dome, Colgate and Western Michigan. Dino Babers will have to look out for that 3-point shooting from Colgate. Sorry, I had to make that joke. Then they go to Purdue, played one of the wildest games I've ever seen, one of the wildest fourth quarters I've ever seen against Purdue last year. Aiden O'Connell's gone. So then a tough game regardless. Not an easy gig to go on the road in the Big Ten. Home against Army, home against Clemson. That's your first 5 on the schedule. So much like last year, Syracuse has got to bank a few wins there. Colgate, Western Michigan. Try to get that win at Purdue. Beat Army. Go into the Clemson game 4-0. We all know Syracuse has played Clemson as tough as anybody in recent years, and hopefully the refs don't get too involved like they did at Clemson last year. I don't think I have to remind everybody about those ridiculous calls on the sideline that happened. But look at this stretch that starts here. Clemson at home, at North Carolina. Now we're into October. At Florida State, bye week at Virginia Tech, and that's a Thursday night, October 26th. Wow. Clemson, Carolina, Florida State, in some order, are going to be picked to win the league. North Carolina brings Drake May back. Florida State brings Jordan Travis back. That's a tough stretch right there. You just got to survive that. So then, by the way, that Virginia Tech game, if you have the means, the ability, all things considered, that road trip's incredible. Lane Stadium at night is one of the best environments in college football. I think I'm going to make that trip myself this year. I even got Virginia Tech colors on today. That's an incredible road trip if you can go. So no home games in the entire month of October. Here's how it rounds out. Home against Boston College, November 4th. Pittsburgh is now at Yankee Stadium. Let's circle back to that in a second. At Georgia Tech, Wake Forest. That's a 7-win team last year that, according to the athletic director, John Wildhack, he told me this straight up in an interview for syracuse.com, in that if Dino keeps improving, he'll still be the coach here. Those are his words. So is that direct improvement in the sense of 8 wins over 7? How do you measure that? That's all subjective. You could always kind of talk your way out of that. You can still improve even if you win 7 games again. Dino does not have a contract extension at this point. We've seen the coaching changes, a lot of coaching staff changes. It was a very quiet signing day yesterday. This is no longer the signing day in college football. That's in December now, right? But Syracuse did sign a wide receiver out of Texas and a long snapper yesterday. And for what it's worth, Emily Leiker wrote about that at syracuse.com if you want to check it out. So schedule matters. Moving that Pittsburgh game to Yankee Stadium, I think, is a mistake. If you have 7 home games, you keep 7 home games on the schedule. It's great that that's the 100th anniversary of college football at Yankee Stadium. I don't think you have to play a game to commemorate that. I think you can let people know about it. Syracuse and Pitt could do some creative things to recognize that. But why would you take away strategy and take a home game off the slate? Not to mention, it's not a great home slate. Clemson's the highlight. Pitt, we brought it up. Some of those teams, it's not a sexy home slate by any stretch of the imagination. They just went to Yankee Stadium to play in the Pinstripe Bowl. Look, there's alums down there. They'll get Syracuse fans there. That's not going to be an issue. But I don't see the trade-off as a good one. I know they'll get some money to go there and do it, but you're in the freaking ACC. Like, you don't need these payoffs to go play these games. Now, I get, like, in a few years, Syracuse is going to play Tennessee in the kickoff classic in Atlanta. That's a different story, right? You're not taking away a home game, number one. And number two, like, that's a huge opportunity in a place you don't normally go to. The Pinstripe Bowl, Yankee Stadium, it's like been there, done that. So I think that's a mistake on Wild Hack's part. I don't think you need to create an event. You know what helps recruiting? Win games, right? Win 8 games and do all you can to win 8 games and go through that process. This doesn't help recruiting. I think that's vastly overrated. I'll look into it myself, but can you give me the direct tie between putting a game at Yankee Stadium and what that results in terms of recruiting? All those recruits were just there, right? Anybody that's interested in recruiting and going to Syracuse from that area, it's not like they don't know Syracuse if they're playing at Yankee Stadium. And if so, a lot of them were there already for the Pinstripe Bowl. So I don't get it. I think it's a mistake. And why take away a home game? We got 7 home games. That's a huge advantage. And now you got 6 in a neutral site and 5 road games. So that's what's happening there. All right, before we go, as Brian says, what's up, Brian? Good to see you, buddy. Let Rutgers play at Yankee Stadium, right? Yeah, let them go there. Huge pickup for Syracuse football, getting Nunzio Campanelli from Rutgers, by the way. That's a big pickup in terms of recruiting in that state. So we'll see if that pays off. All right, where are my lacrosse fans at? Because we got a season starting on Saturday. Syracuse and Vermont. It's a 1:00 face-off. And look, the storylines coming in are Syracuse is coming off its worst season ever. 4-10 last year, a lot of transition, new coaching staff, just injuries piled up. It was just a cocktail of a lot of weird things. Speaking of close games, Syracuse dropped a number of close games. They got blown out a few times. Their defense was really poor. It was just, the bottom fell out. So now what you have is the number 1 recruiting class in the country, highlighted by Joey Spallina, right? Joey Spallina is one of the greatest recruits Syracuse has ever brought in. He's wearing the famed number 22. He's going to be an electric player, and you're going to see it, I think, right from the jump on Saturday. A lot of other younger players are going to get in. Finn Thompson, notably, Billy Dwan, who's on defense. And you got a youth invasion here. Not a lot of experience coming back. Owen Hiltz is back, which is a huge returning player for Syracuse. Griffin Cook is back. A couple other veteran names that you'll recognize, but for the most part, it's a whole new team. Will Mark is a transfer goalie. They had to bring in a transfer to help out at faceoffs. And you see a whole new team this year. In terms of Vermont, the big thing with Vermont, Scotty's excited about lacrosse. They have one of the best face-off guys in the country, Tommy Burke. 5th in the country last year in face-off. Syracuse has a whole new face-off. I think it's going to be by committee. They brought in a kid from Canisius who was pretty decent last year and a couple of younger players that have to step up. And replacing Jacob Fopp is not going to be easy. The 3rd most amount of face-off wins in the history of Syracuse lacrosse. So if Virginia's got possessions and they can slow the game down and force Syracuse to try to go for turnovers and lean on their defense and lean on their goalie, that could be trouble. So when Syracuse does get possessions, they've got to cash them in with that. This is a high-powered offense now. Spallina, Hiltz, transfer Alex Simmons. At attack, I think you're going to see Finn Thompson. At attack, I think you're going to see some new guys. Cole Kirst, the transfer from Lehigh. I think Carter Kempney, freshman from Carthage, of course, where all the Powell brothers went, is going to step in and make an impact offensively. I'm just wondering about this defense. I mean, Nick Kakemo returns. He's a great sophomore defender. Billy Dwan, I mentioned the freshman's going to get on the field, but they don't have a lot of depth of defense. Will Marks, I think, an accomplished goaltender. He led the country in saves 2 years in a row, 2020 and 2021, and had a high save percentage at Long Island, where he comes from. So a lot's got to come together. And you got Vermont to start off. Syracuse actually plays 3 games in their first week. They'll play Albany at the Dome next Friday, then Holy Cross at the Dome on Sunday before things really get saucy and they play Maryland. But Lax is back, baby. Things are getting busy, right? And as Paul notes here, Tucker Dordevic has transferred and gone to Georgetown. And I'll tell you what, guys, Georgetown might win the national championship, speaking of which, and Dordevic might be one of the final pieces of that puzzle. But let us not talk positively about Georgetown. Why would we do that? And Paul, per your comment about Dordevic was that whole offense last year. They just had too many injuries and too many other guys. I think you're going to see a faster-paced team that moves the ball and utilizes a lot more offensive talent. That's what Syracuse lacrosse should be, right? It's just I'm concerned about the defense. I'm concerned about the youths on this team. They just need experience. So if anything, I'll say this. I think they're going to be better than last year. I don't think they make the tournament, though. I think they come up just short of that. I'd love to be wrong, though, because this team actually has a chance to really sneak up on some people. Syracuse lacrosse sneaking up on people. Imagine that. But there's a lot of talent on that offense. So Scott wants to know TV schedule. Good question, Scott. While I am here, let me see if I can find that for you. I don't think there's a lot of like traditional TV games. Vermont, I believe, is going to be, give me a sec here, just popping in, looking at something for you here. I think that's only going to be like ACC Network Extra, right? TV, ACC Network Extra. Yeah, so Vermont is only basically ESPN Plus to check that out. It's not going to be on traditional TV at this point. The Albany game, I don't see anything on that. I'll have to look that up for you. It's a good question because I know some games are slated for TV, but at this point, I think it's still in flux at this point. So sorry, I don't have a better answer for you there, Scott, but I know this game is on ACC Network Extra coming up on Saturday. Linda says that Syracuse lacrosse fans need to temper expectations. It's a young team, need to be kind with criticism, still a year away from greatness. I agree with you, Linda, in that 2024, I think, is the year. This year, they're better. They'll have moments, but there's still a lot they need to learn. A lot. And I think Gary Gates going to do some amazing things here as head coach. And to have a guy like Dave Petromal as your defensive coordinator is an asset that you'll take. And I think Joey Spallina is going to just rewrite the record books here, but it is a process. And I'm just happy lacrosse is back. Let's go. Busy times, friends. All right, so a programming note before we end. A lot of you watching now also watch the post-game shows. Unfortunately, we're not going to have a post-game show Saturday after the Boston College game because, speaking of lacrosse, I'm going to be on lacrosse duty Saturday. I'm covering the game along with my colleague Emily Leiker, and it's a 1 o'clock face-off. Syracuse basketball tips at 5. I don't think the timing's going to work out there for me to do a post-game show. I'm not going to do a post-game show if I don't watch the game. That's not fair to you guys. I don't want to just drop in there and you know, kind of half-ass it, if you will. So no post-game show Saturday, unfortunately, because I'll be doing some lacrosse duties on Saturday. So keep that in mind programming-wise. Easy to find the post-game shows, though. Most of you will get a notification on your Facebook or social media somewhere letting you know we're there. But just so you know, and tell your friends, no post-game show after Syracuse and Boston College on Saturday. So I wanted to note that. Typically we are, though, live on the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page and some of these channels you're watching now after all SU hoops games, wrapping it up for you that way. So we will not be doing it Saturday. And while we're on the subject here, after that, we're looking at Syracuse, Florida State Wednesday. Should be good to go on that one. That's a 7 o'clock tip. I don't see conflicts coming there. So we'll be back on post game at Florida after the Florida State game, and then right back here on Orange Weekly a week from today. We do this Thursdays at noon live. Thanks for all your great comments today, guys. Great comments and questions throughout. Certainly the replay, easy to catch, though, on YouTube, the Facebook channels you're watching on now, and archives there. We put up a post up on syracuse.com as well. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, okay? We got Syracuse basketball coming up. We got Syracuse women's basketball at Virginia Tech tonight. See if Coach Jack's team can recover from a weird loss to Louisville when they lost a bunch of players due to injury. Thankfully, most of them are back upcoming here. And then, of course, as mentioned, Lacrosse, Saturday, 1 o'clock face-off against Vermont. Emily Leiker and I will have full coverage of that for you. So look for it on syracuse.com. Thanks for watching Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. Enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend, friends. We'll talk to you again next time.